Salvo is an expert on Russian affairs. He has been analyzing exactly how the Kremlin works to undermine democracy at home and abroad. He joins us now. And David, this war has been going on for 15 months, and there have been a number of acts of terror that have already happened. Schools, hospitals, apartment buildings. Why is this act such a big deal?
Well, it's a big deal for a couple of reasons. First, as your correspondents have outlined, it's an ecological and agricultural disaster of unbelievable proportions. It's going to displace thousands of people. It's going to affect wheat supplies, water supplies, including, frankly, for areas held by Russian forces, including occupied Crimea. So alone, it's just a humanitarian disaster that, is really just shocking and sad. But it also shows that Russia is indeed culpable here, and it's hard to imagine that it isn't. It just shows that they are willing to launch attacks on civilian infrastructure to attain military objectives. And here the objective is to try to slow down a Ukrainian counteroffensive in the region around Kherson.
David, I want you to listen to National Security Council spokesman John Kirby on the fact that Ukraine's infrastructure is being affected by that destruction of the dam. Take a listen.
In addition to loss of life and livelihoods, its destruction could very well have a devastating impact on Ukraine's energy security, and it will certainly have an impact on Ukraine's canal system.
Should we not have anticipated that this would have been in Vladimir Putin's playbook? After all, in Syria, there were those barrel bombs that were dropped on civilian targets, massive barrels loaded with nails and explosives. It just shows the devastation that Russia brings about when it declares war.
Yeah, I think what we've seen over the last decade or so of Russian aggression in various parts of the world is that, no civilian territory, no civilian piece of infrastructure is out of bounds, honestly. And this is just probably another indication of that. Although it's still unclear what exactly happened here, it's hard to believe that anything other than a Russian sabotage attack on a dam that it held. This is Russian-controlled territory, and it was willing to unleash an unbelievable disaster on people under its authority, including in Crimea. So really, it's just brazen disregard for civilian life.
Like I said, apartments, hospitals, schools. How bad can it get? Is this as bad as it can get, blowing up a dam?
I'd like to think so, but there's always somewhere lower for the Russian military, Russian authorities to stoop. I've long believed that the longer this conflict goes on, the likelier it is that more serious weapons and more serious tactics are used. I hope I'm wrong, and obviously I hope I'm wrong. But I do not think that this is necessarily the lowest that the Russian military can go.
As we pointed out, the Geneva Convention dictates that this should not happen. If it continues to happen, should Ukraine then follow the playbook of Russia and attack civilian infrastructure inside of the Russian territory itself?
No, not only is that, morally abhorrent, but it's also a sure way to lose Western support. I think the moment that Ukraine really starts targeting Russian civilians or civilians held in Russian-controlled territory inside Ukraine, that's the moment that the United States and our European allies are going to start to wonder whether providing continued security assistance to Ukraine makes sense. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Ukraine is going to do that, and I certainly hope they don't, because I'd like to see sustained Western security assistance for Ukraine.
David, let me ask you a question from the Russian side of the coin. Russia says it was Ukraine. Is there a reason why Ukraine would want to blow up the dam, as Russia maintains?
It's hard to imagine, because it does potentially debilitate the Ukrainian military's ability to conduct this counteroffensive in a very strategic region that Ukraine has been signaling it wants to recapture. So it would be really a head-scratching moment for Ukraine to conduct that sort of sabotage. This isn't like the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, where there clearly was some sort of national interest in Ukraine allegedly conducting sabotage. But this dam, with so many thousands of lives at stake and the military ramifications, it's hard to imagine how this would possibly play into Ukrainian national interests.
David, final question before I let you go. Before this war, there was talk of inviting Russia and Vladimir Putin into the G7, calling it the G8. There was that famous image of Hillary Clinton with that reset button saying that it was time to reset relations with Moscow and Russia. Everybody wanted to embrace Russia. Is there any way now, with Vladimir Putin as the head of the Russian Federation, that Russia can once again become part of what is called the global world order?
No, I think the Putin regime has really made Russia a global pariah, and that's a problem of its own making, honestly. And the issue, though, is that this doesn't necessarily end with Vladimir Putin. I think a lot of us in the West have long placed the fate of Russia solely in the hands of Vladimir Putin. But even after he's gone, we see a lot of, challenges maybe a bit strong, but a lot of frustration with this military campaign from his right flank. So there's a lot of nationalist fervor in Russia. It's very possible that the next Vladimir Putin is even more hardline than he is. And so it's not as if once Putin goes that Russia's going to return to being a responsible player on the global stage. I really don't think that. I think we're looking at years and years of conflict, whether military or just geopolitical, of years of conflict with Russia, regardless of who's sitting in the Kremlin.
Head of the Wagner Group saying that Russia is not going far enough. David Salvo, thanks for being with us this evening. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Europe today, marking D-Day. June 6, 79 years ago, Allied forces invading Nazi-controlled France during World War II. This morning, the ceremony held at the American Cemetery in France, now home to the graves of more than 9,300 U.S. soldiers, many dying on D-Day and the days that followed. Some of the surviving World War II veterans were there. Secretary Austin having a simple but very powerful message for those who served.
To the veterans of World War II, we salute you. You saved the world. We must merely defend it. So may God bless the American and Allied troops who fought and fell some 79 years ago.